Why did ancient heroes never need a job yet always have endless money? While today, those who toil like oxen and horses every day can barely save a copper coin at the end of the month. You, the wandering hero, known simply as Lang the Wanderer, scoff internally at this perennial question. You run a calloused thumb over the edge of your sword, the steel glinting with a cold, haughty smile. It's simple. You'd tell a fool who dared to ask. We know how to set the price for our actions, and how to collect the justice tax from those who deserve to lose their wealth. Your life is a canvas of reckless abandon and luxurious consumption. You frequent the finest inns, ordering vast amounts of food and liquor, 10 pounds of beef, 2 jars of fine wine, and a plump roasted chicken, always the minimum. Your silver does not come from tilling fields, but from the brutal and immediate justice you personally enact. Your wealth is the byproduct of chaos, not the reward of order. That day, you were passing through a small, forgotten town. Word spread quickly like bile in the belly of Patriarch Wang, a local tyrant who had been riding roughshod over the peasants, stealing their land and violating their daughters. You felt the familiar empty sag of the money pouch at your hip. It had been worryingly light for several days. As a great hero, you are mandated to rob the rich and aid the poor. But what if you yourself were currently poor? Wouldn't taking from this local villain to finance your own campaign of virtue be entirely justifiable? A cold, calculating smirk crossed your lips. The people call this justice. You call it necessary redistribution of wealth. You gripped your sword and headed straight for the Patriarch Wang's estate. The tyrant's tax. You didn't waste time with talk. First, you beat Patriarch Wang into a barely recognizable pulp, breaking 3 of his ribs and knocking out several teeth. Next, you trussed up his entire household staff and guards, like sacks of grain. You then seated yourself imperiously in the main hall, forcing the groveling, terrified patriarch to hand over every last piece of silver and gold he had stolen from the townsfolk. This is compensation for your sins, you announced, tossing a sack of silver into the corner, a meager fraction of the hall. The rest is for the hero's upkeep. But the confiscation wasn't enough. You demanded he write a full confession of his crimes. When he stammered that he was illiterate, you impatiently dipped a brush in ink and with your own elegant hand wrote the indictment: murder, arson, theft, and the repeated violation of the innocent. Sign it, you commanded, pointing to the blank space. But I cannot write, the patriarch wailed. Then bleed, you snarled. You forced his trembling hand to leave a bloody fingerprint beneath the list of atrocities you had composed. You had originally intended to deliver him to the local magistrate, ensuring he wouldn't harm the people after your departure. The patriarch screamed, his voice raw with indignation. You are the tyrant here. This is robbery. You met his gaze with supreme contempt. This is called upholding justice and destroying evil. You fool. You are merely paying the consequences for a corrupt world that allowed you to thrive. You took a small cut of the silver to replenish your own funds, then distributed the majority to the terrified villagers who had gathered outside. They immediately dropped to their knees, bowing low. Thank you, Hero Lang. A true hero acts for the people and the nation. With a heavy pouch of self-righteous silver, you mounted your weary horse, a shadow of satisfaction clinging to your conscience. Your righteous path continued, funded by the spoils of the wicked. The line between hero and villain, however, had just blurred a shade darker. You rode for 3 days, the scent of fresh silver mingling pleasantly with the dust on your worn blue robes. Your funds, though replenished, were temporary. A great hero required constant, renewable income. That is why you enjoyed stopping at busy roadside inns. They were melting pots of the 3 teachings and 9 schools, where gossip and vital intelligence flowed as freely as the cheap wine. Stepping into a bustling inn, you loudly called out for the waiter, 10 pounds of beef, 2 jars of the finest, strongest wine, and make that a whole fat chicken. The waiter looked dubiously at your faded attire. Esteemed guest, that is a vast amount. Can you truly consume it all? You slammed 2 heavy silver ingots onto the table, silencing the surrounding patrons. Bring it, I can finish it. Just ensure the wine is cold and the meat is hot. As you devoured the feast, drinking with the hearty pleasure of a man whose life depends on sudden expenditures of energy, the noise around you melted into a useful background hum. Then, a conversation from a nearby table snagged your attention. They spoke of Miss Lu Ying, the daughter of the local silk merchant, who had been abducted by the ruthless bandits of Black Wind Fortress. A reward of 50 ounces of gold was being offered a king's ransom. The father is waiting upstairs in room number 1. One patron whispered excitedly. He's desperate. Anyone who brings her back gets the entire fortune. You casually traced the length of your sword hilt. 50 ounces of gold? That was enough to fund your travels for a year, perhaps more. A mission of justice? Highly profitable, and entirely within your skill set. Wiping the grease from your mouth with the back of your hand, you stood up, pushing back your chair with a loud scrape, and strode upstairs. You kicked open the door to room number 1. Where is Blackwind Fortress? You demanded without preamble. The men inside, surrounding the distraught merchant, turned to stare. You looked unimpressive. Faded robes, a face weathered by sun and wine, and a slightly swollen pouch containing only the remnants of the patriarch's silver. You hardly looked like the type of hero capable of tackling a notorious mountain stronghold. But the silk merchant, Old Man Leo, clutched your sleeves with the desperation of a drowning man grasping a straw. His hands trembled violently. Brave warrior, Black Wind Fortress is 30 li from here, nestled in the cliffs of Hawkspeak. I shall immediately arrange a horse for you. No need for a horse, you waved dismissively. Let me finish my meal and I will set out. You returned downstairs, ignoring the murmurs of doubt and ridicule. One busybody scholar leaned in, trying to offer a cautionary word. Brave warrior, the Black Wind bandits are ferocious. Going alone, you risk meeting a bad end. You skewered a piece of beef with your knife, laughing softly. You need not worry. When I worked as a master escort for merchant caravans, I dealt with tougher bandits than these. Worry about your scrolls, not my sword. Another drinker sneered. It's pointless. If he wants to die, let him go. He simply smiled, called for 20 more pounds of strong white liquor, emptied the jar in one powerful gulp, wiped your mouth, and set off alone. Hawkspeak and the principle of restraint as twilight bled into the night sky. You stood at the foot of the cliffs of Hawkspeak. The Black Wind Fortress loomed above, its wooden palisade grimly decorated with rows of dried skulls. A faint, mournful cry, undeniably the sound of a terrified young woman, echoed from within. Miss Liu Ying. You drew your long sword, a blade that shimmered faintly in the fading light. Using the cover of the dense shadow, you silently approached the main gate. 2 bandits stood guard. With a speed that defied your leisurely appetite, you darted out. A swift, open-palmed strike sent the first bandit flying backward nearly 30 feet, collapsing unconscious into a pile of firewood. The second guard barely had time to widen his eyes before your sword was pressed against his throat. Take me to your great chief, you commanded, the steel pressing just hard enough to draw a single drop of blood. The great chief of Black Wind Fortress was a ferocious brute with a scarred face, wielding a massive executioner-style ghost head blade. Which fool dares meddle with this chief's affairs? He bellowed, his voice thick with rage and liquor. You gave no verbal reply. Your sword became a blur of silver light. The chief's massive saber chopped down again and again, but you always danced just out of reach, parrying the heavier blows with precise, effortless movements. You were not trying to kill them. You consistently maintained your core principle. If you can subdue, do not kill. In less than 3 minutes, the fight was over. Excluding a few fools who were too zealous and died instantly, every remaining bandit. The great chief was disarmed and securely tied to the supporting posts of the hall. You cut the ropes binding Miss Liu Ying. She immediately burst into tears, clinging to your arm. Brave warrior, I was so terrified. From your inner pocket, you pulled out a small piece of candied fruit purchased earlier that morning from a street vendor and offered it to her. Do not fear, I will take you home now. It was dawn when you returned Miss Liu Ying to the Wang estate. Old Man Liu wept with joy, immediately commanding his servants to bring out the promised reward, a chest containing 50 glittering ounces of gold, nearly blinding in the early morning light. He took only 5 ounces of gold. When I was a master escort, a mission of this caliber was only worth this amount, you stated firmly, pushing the glittering chest back. Please use the rest, Old Man Liu, to distribute among the villagers who suffered from last year's floods. Their fields remain unplanted. Old Man Liu's eyes reddened with respect and gratitude. He bowed deeply. Such high principles, brave warrior. I shall see to it immediately. You accepted the praise and the meager fee, content that you had maintained the facade of incorruptible heroism. The 5 ounces of gold were simply your professional fee. The 50 ounces were a tax you delegated to the deserving poor. You felt the pleasant sting of pride, the pride of a man who defines his own justice. You collected your horse from the inn and rode south, planning your next destination. Later that afternoon, seeking a quiet place to water your horse and rest, you veered off the main road and entered a dense stretch of wood near a clear, bubbling brook. Suddenly, your sharp senses flared. You caught the low, guttural chuckles of men and the sound of dry leaves rustling unnaturally. Hiding your horse in a thicket, you crept closer, your hand already on your sword hilt. What you saw made your blood run cold. Despite your usual detachment, 3 rough-looking thugs, not standard bandits, but local lowlife, were stalking a young village girl who was innocently picking mushrooms by the stream. Their eyes were predatory, their intentions clear and vile. They were planning to abduct and rape her. The hero's claim. You burst from the trees like a striking viper. Your longsword flashed. It was clean, swift, and brutal. These men were not the disciplined bandits of a fortress. They were petty criminals who crumbled instantly. Their surprise was their downfall. The fight lasted mere seconds. 1 thug was instantly disabled, another fled screaming into the woods, and the third lay on the ground, bleeding profusely from a slash wound to the leg. They were neutralized. The young girl, who could be no older than 7, saw the blood and the powerful figure of the hero. She sank to her knees, trembling violently. Thank you, great hero. You saved my life. Without you, my life would be ruined, she choked out, her voice thin with terror and relief. You sheathed your sword, the tension in your body slowly receding. Your eyes, however, did not hold the distant kindness you showed Old Man Liu. They held a calculating, unsettling intensity. A life saved demands a commensurate debt, you said, your voice low and dangerously smooth. I do not require gold or silver. The girl looked up, confusion mixing with her tears. Then what does the hero require? You walked closer, standing over her. You must understand the nature of power, you stated, your gaze sweeping over her small, vulnerable frame. The villains wanted something from you. They sought to take it by force. I, the savior, have protected your life, but that protection carries a price. You knelt down, your face just inches from hers. You are valuable, girl. Your life, your personhood IT is all currency here in the wilderness. The villains sought to claim you without payment. I have paid for your survival with my own effort and risk. You pressed the point, your authority absolute. The price for your life is mine to name, and what I name is the fee of the body. You claimed her, enforcing your own definition of debt and honor. In your mind, you had earned this right, a hero's prerogative. The lust that had driven the thugs was now veiled under the cold, self-serving logic of just compensation. She was simply an asset, and you were collecting your due. The girl's terrified whimper was the only sound in the peaceful forest clearing. The grim exchange, utterly twisting the meaning of the heroism that had just occurred. The next morning, you woke up beside the weeping girl. The sun dappled through the leaves, illuminating the chilling disparity between the tranquil setting and the raw terror in her eyes. You felt a momentary flicker of something uncomfortable, not quite guilt, but a sharp awareness of the violation. It was the fleeting, inconvenient echo of the man you were supposed to be, instead of an apology or a kind word. He simply left a small, smooth silver ingot beside her. It was enough to buy her passage home and a new beginning. Perhaps it is payment for services rendered, you rationalized. Mounting your horse without looking back, it is fair trade for a life saved. The cost of justice is steep, both for the hero and the rescued. You continued your journey south. In the saddle, you munched on a piece of the candied fruit you had bought from Miss Liu Ying and reflected on the two distinct ways. Money now entered your pouch. The justice tax, silver taken from the likes of Patriarch Wang, and the gold from the Black Wind Fortress public. Righteous income, the shadow fee, the dark, unspoken price exacted from the vulnerable, like the girl by the stream. Morally corrosive income. You pushed the memory of the latter deep down, focusing instead on the former. As you rode, you noticed the financial situation was once again robust. Your hip pouch contained over 3 ounces of silver, enough for a few more nights at an inn, and certainly enough for several more jars of strong wine. The Brotherhood of the Martial World. Your travels soon took you past an outlying station of the Heavenly Steed sect, Bang Thian, a prominent and respected martial arts school dedicated to defending the common people. The disciples guarding the gate immediately recognized you, their eyes lit up with profound respect. "It is Hero Lang," exclaimed the head disciple, bowing low, "the one who helped us drive back the local strongmen from the market last month. Our Grandmaster invites you in for tea and discourse." You shook your head, the silver of the shadow fee feeling heavy in your pocket. "Thank you, but time is short. I must proceed to the next town. I hear whispers of a sexual predator harassing the women there." The word predator tasted bitter on your tongue, given your recent actions, but you suppressed the feeling. The disciple insisted, pulling a wrapped cloth package from beneath his robes. Inside, you could feel the reassuring weight of metal. "Please, Hero Lang," the disciple urged. The Grandmaster insisted. "This is 20 ounces of silver," he says. "In the martial world, people must aid each other. He knows a hero's road is difficult and long." You took the heavy package. This time, there was no hesitation, no protest about the cost. This was pure, unadulterated white money, the clean silver of fraternity and respect. This silver represented your official standing as a force for good in the Zhenghu martial world. You needed this validation. "Very well," you said, tucking the silver securely into your main pouch. "Tell your Grandmaster, I accept his kindness. I will use it to further the cause of justice." The taste of true appreciation with your funds dramatically bolstered, you mounted your horse and continued on. You passed back through the town where you had rescued Miss Liu Ying. You saw Old Man Liu personally overseeing the distribution of grain and supplies, using the gold you had refused, to the drought-stricken villagers. Their faces, once etched with despair, now held a rare, genuine spark of hope and relief as you rode through the cheering crowds. A small child dressed in thin, patched cotton darted out. He was clutching something wrapped in a leaf. "Big brother," the boy cried, holding up a warm, steaming object. "This is for you. Please eat it." It was a hot steamed bunna, simple, honest offering. You accepted the gift. You took a bite. The flavor, warm and simple, spread through your mouth. It was the purest taste of gratitude you had ever known, tasting infinitely better than the most expensive roasted beef or the finest aged wine. For a moment, the heavy burden of the shadow fee in your pocket seemed unbearable. This steamed bun, this sincere offering, tasted like the true reward of heroism. You thought of the cold silver ingot left behind for the girl in the woods. You knew, with sudden, painful clarity, that you were carrying 2 souls. The noble Hero Lang, and the predatory, self-serving wanderer. But as the sweet taste faded, the practical reality returned. The silver from the heavenly steed sect was necessary. The shadow fee was merely a means to an end. You smiled at the boy, thanked him, and rode on. The conflicting demands of your dark and light deeds sealed within your traveler's pouch. You continued your path. The direction guided less by a moral compass, and more by rumors of injustice, or, more accurately, rumors of profitable injustice. Your conscience, though momentarily pricked by the child's sincere offering, quickly grew numb again, fortified by the sheer weight of the silver you carried. Youth a wandering hero, Langware now an economic and ethical anomaly in the jungle. Your livelihood was a perfectly self-sustaining cycle. The Purge. You eliminated threats to public order. Patriarch Wong, Blackwind Fortress. The collection you took a justifiable professional fee, 5 ounces of gold, 5 ounces of silver. The Fraternity. You received legitimate donations and aid, 20 ounces from the Heavenly Steed Sect. The Taxation of Fear. You claimed the dark. Personal rewards from the utterly helpless, the girl in the woods. You did not need to be employed, because you had monetized the very concept of justice. You were the judge, the jury, the executioner, and the tax collector, all rolled into one efficient, ruthless figure. You understood that society was fundamentally broken. The magistrates were corrupt or cowards. The true evil was left unchecked. And into that gaping moral vacuum stepped you, the self-appointed agent of chaotic order. Your actions, whether noble saving Miss Liu Ying, or depraved claiming the mushroom-picking girl, were all rationalized under your own absolute law, the law of the wandering hero. Is it better to let the weak be devoured by villains, or to save them and claim the spoils yourself? You believed the former was failure, and the latter was necessary. The two souls of Lungon evening. You stopped at a remote tavern. You sat alone, sipping strong liquor, the firelight reflecting in your weary eyes. You knew that the world sang praises for the hero Lang, who refused 50 ounces of gold, but no one knew the wanderer Lang, who saw a debt to be collected in the fear of a vulnerable girl. The conflict was the cost of your freedom. To maintain the illusion of purity necessary for the justice, tax the public funds. You had to secretly indulge in the corruption of the shadow fee, the private funds. The purity gave you the power to collect the gold. The corruption gave you the will to continue operating outside any moral bounds. As you finished the last of your wine, you reflected on the original question. Why do great heroes have endless money while honest workers struggle? The answer was simple and darkly satisfying. The honest workers are bound by the system. The hero operates outside the system, taking the maximum value from every interaction. The hero doesn't create wealth. The hero controls its redistribution and pockets a large, unregulated share. You stood up, throwing a heavy silver ingot onto the counter, payment for the room and provisions for the poor who might visit the inn next. This small act of charity was the last remaining balm for your scarred soul. You walked out into the cold night. You felt the reassuring presence of the silver in your pouch. The silver that represented both your righteous deeds and your grievous sins. As long as this world is unjust, you thought, I will never be poor. And as long as you walked the earth, the line between justice and villainy would remain a dark, shifting blur, a profitable landscape for the wandering hero. Your journey, and the endless accumulation of your two conflicting currencies, continued into the south.